Shadow was watching from across Big Bear. Kaydee was already settled in the Twin Pines. She had not followed him there. She had not landed beside him. She was simply perched alone looking over the valley. Then Shadow moved. He left his own perch, crossed the space between them, and flew directly to the tree where Kaydee was waiting. He landed on the same branch. And for the next several hours, neither eagle seemed in any hurry to leave. It was one of the quietest moments in this entire story, and maybe one of the most important, because for days Kaydee had looked like the one doing all the chasing. This time she stayed still. Shadow came to her. On the morning of August 14th, friends of Big Bear Valley first found Shadow on the lookout. Snag one of his familiar perches. He sat behind the pine branches taking in the view. Eventually, he left for a morning flight. Later, Kaydee, still known then as Kaydee-1, appeared on the Twin Pines. She was alone. She had only been on the Big Bear cameras for a little over a week. At that point, almost every new sighting still came with the same question. Who is this eagle? Why is she here? Will she stay? Then Shadow answered one part of that story with an action. Friends of Big Bear Valley wrote that it was not long before he decided to keep the young eagle company. He flew onto the same branch. For a while they sat apart and looked over the scenery. Then Shadow hopped down to a lower branch beneath her, and there they stayed. Several relaxing hours. No chase, no argument, no awkward beak contact, no one forcing the other bird to move. Just time. That sounds almost too simple. But compare it with what had happened only 1 week earlier. On August 7, Shadow had been perched on the lookout snag for about 45 minutes when a nearly mature banded eagle joined him. Shadow left in less than 30 seconds. The visitor waited about a minute and then flew out in the same direction. At the time, friends of Big Bear Valley was careful not to say with certainty that the bird was Kaydee. But the event created the first emotional picture of this new eagle story. A young visitor arrives. Shadow leaves. Distance. Now move forward to August 14. Kaydee is already on the Twin Pines. Shadow arrives. He stays. Not seconds. Hours. That is why the morning matters. Not because 3 hours on a tree proves a pair bond. Because Shadow's choice was different. And when behavior changes, the story changes with it. For much of August, Kaydee has been the easier eagle to understand. She is curious. She explores. She follows. She visits the nest. She moves sticks. She has even tested Shadow's personal space closely enough to get a reaction from him. Kaydee is active. She creates obvious moments. Shadow is harder to read. He can appear calm, then cautious, then tolerant, then suddenly gone. That makes his decisions more valuable. When Shadow approaches first, it stands out. And on August 14, he did. He did not need Kaydee to chase him. He did not wait until she flew into his tree. He made the flight. That moment gives us a new way to look at everything that happened afterward. On August 19th, Shadow flew into the Twin Pines again. Less than a minute later, Kaydee joined him. They stayed on different branches for roughly 3 hours. Then Shadow left. Kaydee followed 2 seconds later. Friends of Big Bear Valley joked that Shadow now had a shadow. That moment looked like the opposite of August 14th. Shadow first, Kaydee second. But put both events together. One day she joins him. Another day he joins her. That is more interesting than a one-way chase. It suggests that the geography of Big Bear is becoming shared. The same trees, the same roost area, the same nest, the same morning air filled with both of their calls. And the more those locations repeat, the less every meeting looks like a random collision. It still might not become a permanent relationship. Kaydee could leave. Seasonal behavior could change. Another eagle could appear. But repetition creates a reason to keep watching, especially because Kaydee is at an age when her adult life is beginning to change. She was hatched in Southern California in March 2022 and banded in the Prado Basin. By the time she appeared in Big Bear, she was about 4.5 years old. That is right around the age when many bald eagles are reaching breeding maturity. Raptor biologist Pete Bloom, who helped band her, explained that eagles around this age may begin prospecting. They investigate territories. They look at large trees. They look at nesting opportunities. They look at whether an established bird already has a mate. That does not mean Kaydee came to Big Bear because she was searching for Shadow personally. Big Bear itself may be the attraction. The lake, food, perches, the nest, a proven eagle territory. Then she finds Shadow inside it, an adult resident male, experienced, established. And suddenly the question becomes more complicated. Is Kaydee following Shadow because she is interested in him? Is she following him because he knows the territory? Is she learning where to perch, where to roost, where to move? Maybe all of those things can overlap. But none of them fully explain August 14, because Kaydee was already sitting there. Shadow was the bird who crossed the distance. That choice belongs to him. It does not tell us why he made it. Wildlife cameras give us behavior, not private thoughts. We cannot say he missed her. We cannot say he wanted affection. We cannot say he had decided she would become his next mate. But we can say what happened. He flew to the tree where she was perched. He landed on the same branch. Then he stayed in the same tree for hours. That is enough to make the moment important, especially when you remember the emotional context. Jackie had died only days earlier. For millions of viewers, Big Bear still felt empty. People had spent years seeing Shadow beside the same female. They knew the shape of the pair, the way two white heads could appear on the same branch, the way Jackie and Shadow would return to the nest, the way one eagle's presence seemed to complete the other half of the familiar scene. Then that picture disappeared, and before anyone had time to adjust, Kaydee appeared. Some viewers welcomed the sight. Others were not ready. Some felt that every new image of Shadow beside another eagle came too soon. And then August 14 gave them a scene that was almost painfully gentle. Two eagles in the Twin Pines. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that could erase Jackie. Nothing that asked the audience to forget. Just Shadow choosing not to be alone for a few hours. Friends of Big Bear Valley used the title, "You've Got a Friend," for that update. That wording was careful. Friend. Not mate. Not replacement. Not destiny. Company. And maybe that was exactly right for the moment. Because the strongest thing we could say was also the simplest. Shadow had company, and he had chosen to go where that company was. From there, the story continued. On August 18th, Shadow and Kaydee were heard vocalizing before sunrise. Friends of Big Bear Valley described it as a morning conversation. Shadow called. Kaydee listened. Their voices moved through the valley while ravens tried to compete with the sound. Then on August 19th, they shared the roost area. They spent hours on the Twin Pines. Kaydee followed Shadow after he left. She later went to the nest and then returned to the roost where the two eagles chortled as the day ended. A few days later, they greeted another morning from the same roost area. Kaydee went to the nest. Shadow remained behind. Later, they occupied separate snags. Then Shadow flew. Kaydee followed only 2 seconds later. By the evening, they were together in the nest. Kaydee moved sticks. Shadow watched. Then he joined some of the work. This is why the Twin Pines moment cannot be treated like an isolated romantic clip. It is one piece inside a larger rhythm. Approach. Distance. Return. Shared space. Separate space. Shared space again. That rhythm is more believable than a simple love story because it allows both eagles to remain individuals. Kaydee can explore alone. Shadow can disappear for hours. They do not need to be attached to each other every minute. In fact, the separations may make the reunions more useful to watch. If two birds are constantly forced together in one small location, proximity means less. But when each bird can choose from an entire valley and still repeatedly ends up near the other, the choices become interesting. That is why I would watch Shadow more closely now. Kaydee has already shown us that she is willing to approach. She has followed him, joined him, visited the nest, returned to the roost. Her interest in Big Bear is obvious enough to keep the cameras busy. Shadow is the slower question. Will he keep approaching her? Will he choose her tree again? Will he land near her when she is already at the nest? Will he begin arriving at places where Kaydee is waiting, instead of always being the bird she follows? Those are the moments that could show whether this association is becoming more reciprocal. Pete Bloom has said he believes it is highly likely that the two birds currently appearing to form a pair bond could be a pair when nesting begins around December. That is a strong assessment from someone who has spent decades working with raptors. But even that does not make every August interaction a courtship signal. It makes the coming pattern worth watching. And if the pattern becomes more reciprocal, August 14 may look increasingly important. Because reciprocity is what changes the story from Kaydee keeps following Shadow to something more balanced. One eagle approaches, then the other. One leaves, then the other finds them again. One works in the nest, then the other joins. Not perfectly, not every time, but often enough to become a pattern. There is another reason this matters as fall approaches. Bald eagle behavior changes with the seasons. Late summer is a different world from the period when courtship and nest preparation become serious. Friends of Big Bear Valley has repeatedly warned viewers not to rush the conclusion. The real test comes later. That means we have a rare chance to watch the relationship before it becomes obvious. If Kaydee remains, if Shadow continues tolerating her, if both birds begin using the nest more often, we may be watching the quiet stage before stronger seasonal behavior changes the tone. That is what makes little moments like August 14 so valuable. There was no hormone-driven winter nesting frenzy, no egg, no urgent need to defend a clutch. No reason the two eagles had to sit together. They simply did. And sometimes voluntary calm is more interesting than dramatic action. Shadow could have landed somewhere else. Kaydee could have left when he arrived. Neither happened. Hours passed. The cameras kept watching. The eagles kept sitting. If you are looking only for a kiss, you could miss the entire point. Comfort can be quieter than affection. Familiarity can look boring. Two animals simply stop reacting strongly to each other. They remain in the same tree. They look over the same valley. They do nothing. And the lack of conflict becomes information. That does not mean we should romanticize every peaceful perch. Bald eagles can share space outside breeding contexts. They can roost near other eagles. They can tolerate individuals without forming a permanent pair. But that is where repetition matters again. One peaceful perch is one peaceful perch, then another shared roost, then another tree, then the nest, then calls, then another return. Eventually, the context around each moment becomes richer, and perhaps that is why the emotional power of this story keeps growing. It is not one spectacular event. It is accumulation. A bird that once looked unfamiliar begins looking familiar. A tree that once held one eagle begins holding two more often. A nest that felt empty begins receiving visits again. A male that could have remained alone is occasionally choosing company. None of this erases Jackie. Nothing could. Jackie's history with Shadow is already written across years of Big Bear life. Kaydee is not entering that history backward. She is entering what comes after it. And what comes after loss can be uncomfortable precisely because it is new. August 14th did not ask anyone to decide how they felt about the future. It offered one simple image. Shadow saw Kaydee in the Twin Pines. He went to her. He stayed. There is one more reason the August 14 scene matters. It gives us a baseline for Shadow, not Kaydee. Shadow. Kaydee's behavior has been easy to track because she keeps creating movement. She arrives, she follows, she checks the nest, she moves sticks, she returns. But if this relationship is going to become something more balanced, the real change has to become visible in Shadow too. That is why one voluntary approach can matter more than 10 clips of Kaydee chasing him. It gives us something to compare against later. Imagine the next several weeks. Kaydee is perched somewhere familiar. the twin pines, the cactus snag, the nest tree. Shadow is somewhere else. Does he ignore her? Does he remain in another part of the habitat? Or does he cross the distance again? If he does, then August 14th stops looking like a single sweet coincidence and begins looking like the first example of a behavior that repeated. That is the kind of progression a long wildlife story needs. Not a bigger claim, a better pattern. The same logic works in reverse. If Shadow never again approaches Kaydee first, then August 14th remains exactly what the camera recorded. One peaceful morning between two eagles sharing a good habitat. There is nothing wrong with that answer. The value comes from having a real question the cameras can test. And that question becomes even more interesting because Shadow is the established bird. He does not need Kaydee to show him where the best perches are. He does not need her to teach him the lake. He does not need her to guide him toward the nest. He already knows Big Bear. So when he flies toward the place where she is sitting, the action cannot be explained by simple territory learning on his side. Again, we cannot know his motivation. But we can recognize that the choice is his. That is a subtle but important difference. Kaydee following Shadow can serve many possible functions. She may be interested in him. She may be learning the territory. She may be watching where an experienced resident eagle goes. Shadow joining Kaydee is a different kind of evidence because the resident male is the one changing location. That is why this story should not spend 5 minutes explaining eagle biology before the viewer gets the emotional point. The emotional point is already clear. She waited. He came. Then the biology can help us understand why the moment is still not a final answer. That order matters. Story first, explanation second. And the story kept rewarding viewers for staying with it. After August 14th came August 18th. The calls. Then August 19, the long twin pines perch, the 2-second follow. Then the evening roost. Then Kaydee's repeated nest visits. Then August 23, shared morning song, separate movements, another 2-second follow. Then the nest interaction where Kaydee moved sticks and Shadow stayed nearby. A single approach on August 14th would not carry much weight by itself, but the later timeline gives it company. That is what makes it stronger without turning it into proof. The context keeps growing, and the emotional contrast keeps growing too. At the beginning, viewers saw a Shadow who appeared ready to leave when an unfamiliar eagle arrived. Later, they saw a Shadow willing to spend hours in the same tree with Kaydee. Then a Shadow willing to remain in the nest while she worked. Then a Shadow who sometimes moved away when she pushed too close but did not turn every awkward moment into permanent separation. That is not one giant leap. It is a series of smaller thresholds. 30 seconds, hours, different branches, same branch structure, same roost, same nest. Those thresholds are what make the future worth watching, because the next threshold could be even smaller. Shadow lands closer than before. He stays 5 minutes longer. He joins nest work without waiting. He follows Kaydee after she leaves. None of those things would need a dramatic headline if the footage is strong. The change would be visible, and that may be the best possible direction for this series. Let the eagles create the drama. Do not force a scientific conclusion onto every frame. Do not force romance onto every movement either. Watch the choices. Let one choice lead to the next. Then ask whether the direction is changing. That is exactly what August 14 did. It changed the direction. For once, Kaydee did not close the distance. Shadow did. And if another Shadow-initiated approach happens, the meaning of this first one will change immediately. That is the beauty of a live camera. Evidence does not stay frozen. Tomorrow can rewrite yesterday. A quiet branch can become the first chapter of a pattern nobody recognized at the time, or it can remain a quiet branch. Either way, viewers get to watch the answer form instead of being handed one too early. That is why August 14 deserves to stay in memory. Not because it proved what Shadow and Kaydee would become, because it gave Shadow his own first unmistakable move in a story that had mostly been driven by Kaydee. Maybe months from now that moment will look ordinary. Maybe Kaydee will leave Big Bear and it will become only a beautiful summer memory. Or maybe the coming season will make viewers look back and realize that the story began changing in moments exactly like this. Before the nest work became serious. Before stronger courtship. Before anyone had an answer. One eagle waited in a tree. The other crossed the valley. And for several hours, Shadow chose to stay by her side. So the next time Kaydee is perched alone somewhere in Big Bear, do not watch only her. Find Shadow. Watch what he does. Because Kaydee has already shown us she is willing to close the distance. Now the most interesting question may be whether Shadow keeps choosing to close it too.